Honourable member for York South Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to bring us back to the matter at hand, which is leadership. What we're talking about here today is leadership, the leadership of the government of Canada in leading not just Canada, but the rest of the world in tackling global climate change. It used to be called global warming. People didn't like that. It's now called global climate change. I like global warming because you could get a real idea of what it meant. We are trying to deal with a real phenomenon. It's really happening. It's not a mystery anymore. It's not something that people are imagining. And it's catastrophic. What is about to happen to the planet is something that can be prevented, but for some reason, governments all over the world are reluctant to take the leadership role that they need to take to do it. And Canada has traditionally been a country where leadership on issues of global importance were things that we could be counted on. Canada could be counted on to take on the role of being a peacekeeper. In 1939, Canada was counted on before the United States to move into Europe with troops to help defend Britain and the rest of Europe. We didn't have to wait for the United States to jump on board before we would do it, but that's what the Conservative government is telling us here today. We got to wait until the big players jump on board before we do anything about climate change. And that's wrong. One need only look at where the greenhouse gases come from to understand the enormity of the problem that faces us. Essentially, you could take a pie chart, and I can't show you one, but imagine there's a pie chart, and about a fifth of each section of the pie is made up of agriculture is about a fifth of the pie, industry is about a fifth, goods transportation is about a fifth, human transportation is about a fifth, and heating and cooling our dwellings is about a fifth. So when you look at that pie and you say, okay, now we have to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases each of those sectors contribute, or just shut one of them down altogether. Let's shut down, for example, industry. No, that's not a good idea because we are an industrial country. We need our industry. So what are we going to shut down? We're going to shut down goods transportation. That doesn't work either. So what we have to do is actually shrink the amount of greenhouse gases coming out of each of those sectors of our economy. And the Conservatives have suggested we're going to do it by 17% from 2005 levels by 2015. But what really needs to happen and what the world leaders have agreed and what scientists agreed is we need to reduce by 80% by 2050. Well, now you look at that pie. Are you shutting down 4 parts of our economy to get to 80%? Are you actually closing down goods transportation, people transportation, industry and agriculture, leaving only heating and cooling, which is essential to get by? No, of course not. But there needs to be a much, much bigger response than the one we're getting from the other side of this House to deal with it in such an enormous way. We don't have a time to waste while we dither over which country is in or out of this club. That's not what we're about. We're Canadians. We lead the world on issues like this. We don't say, oh, well, you know, we're only 2% and therefore the rest of the world should do this and we'll just continue to put our 2% out. If we had attitudes, think of what our kids would say. If our attitude was, go ahead and litter because it's only 2% what you put on the ground. That's not what we as adults want to tell our children, and it shouldn't be what we as Canadian leaders tell the rest of the world. Our 2% is actually 4 or 5 times greater than it should be because we are one of the world's largest per capita consumers of fossil fuel energy. Why is that? It's not just because we're in a cold country. It's because we don't do anything about our fossil fuel consumption. I'll give you a real-world example, and let's take the transportation sector. Let's just take the transportation sector as one of the 4 pieces of the pie, and the human transportation sector as one of those 4 or 5 pieces of the pie, which is, as I think, is low-hanging fruit. It's something we could do something about really easily and really quickly. And they have done it in Europe. In Switzerland, we discovered, as we were examining witnesses at our Transportation Committee, 80% of the trips taken by the population of Switzerland is in public transit. 80%. That's what we should be aiming for. That's how you reduce greenhouse gases by 80% out of one sector of the economy, is by building a transportation infrastructure system that is convenient, is regular, runs like a Swiss watch, which is what happens in Switzerland, so that they know they're going to get from point A to point B in a reasonable period of time, that's competitive with using their own personal vehicle. But we're not doing that. We are building roads. Every province in this country is building roads as fast as they can because cars are the only way people know how to get around. We as a federal government ought to be encouraging the building of public transit. We ought to be using our large arm of the law, as it were, our large spending capacity that we have as a federal institution to create public transit infrastructure in this country that would take people out of their cars and into public transit and in mechanisms that are electric, which then in a lot of the country, electric generation is done without the use of fossil fuels. And it can be replaced quite easily by the use of windmills, by the use of photovoltaics, by the use of hydroelectric systems that do not consume any hydrocarbons and therefore do not emit any greenhouse gases. Instead, we are encouraging the use of personal vehicles. We are sucking fossil fuels out of the ground as fast as we possibly can. And all we will say as a government about doing that is, as we expand the sucking of fossil fuels out of the ground, let's do it in a slightly less consumptive way next year. That's not the way to solve the problem of greenhouse gas emissions on this planet. The way to solve the the problem of greenhouse gas emissions on this planet is to consume less fossil fuels. Dramatically less fossil fuels. Not a little bit, not 17% over 10 years, 80% over the next 30 years, 40 years. That's how we have to do it. And we can create jobs in the meantime. We can build an industry in Canada, an industrial base that is based on green technologies, that is based on the generation of electricity using non-fossil fuel sources. We can generate, we can build vehicles that are electric, that can transport people in large numbers. Instead, we turn to other countries to build them for us. We should be taking the leadership. We should be building jobs in this country based on what we know we're going to need in 40 years. We know we're going to need more efficient ways of getting the jobs done. We know we're going to need more efficient and less consumptive ways of getting around. We know we're going to need more efficient and less consumptive ways of getting our agriculture done. And since we know all this, and it's a little ways in the future, we should be planning for it. We should be actually taking steps to create these industries and to create an industrial model in Canada that builds jobs around what we know we're going to need in 40 years. Instead, we're told over and over again by the other side of the House that the jobs are in the oil patch. The jobs are going to be where oil is coming out of the ground. Well, if the rest of the world wakes up and realizes we can't actually consume that much oil because we won't have a planet to live in anymore, the jobs aren't going to be in the oil patch. The economies of the world are not going to demand oil if they decide they're going to create sustainable environments, create sustainable industries, create sustainable transportation, create sustainable agriculture, create sustainable home heating and cooling, all of which we think, on this side of the House, we should be working towards consuming fewer fossil fuels. How much time have I got left, Mr. Speaker? Half a minute. Oh, I got to wrap this up. We are in a position where we could be leaders in the world. We shouldn't be pointing fingers at the other countries in the world and say, until you lead, we're not going to go there. That's wrong-headed. We should be taking this bull by the horns, creating the jobs, creating the industry, and creating the technologies that are going to bring us out of this morass. We should not be investing anymore in sucking fuel out of the ground, nor should we be counting on the jobs that will be created to ferry stranded passengers at Vancouver Airport when the airport floods. Look at the jobs we got running ferry boats across Vancouver Airport. That's not the kind of jobs this country needs or wants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question and comment.